We are live in the Asia Tech Podcast studio. My name is Graham Brown, joined by founder of Panalyt, Daniel West. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. We're going to talk about, well, your journey as an entrepreneur. We're going to talk about people analytics, exactly what that is, what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Bit of your background as well, and also your journey in the team where you've been. So like the last few months, what's happening, the kind of people involved in your team, your raise, companies that you've worked with. There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
Let's start at the top. Let's talk about Panalyt. Let's put that on the table. We've got your pitch deck here, Daniel. So we're not going to completely go through the whole pitch deck. We'll make that available for people if they want to watch it and watch along. If they're listening on the audio, we'll describe what we're talking about as well. Let's talk about what Panalyt is first, and then we'll maybe back up a little bit and talk about how you got to that, the why, the problem that you were trying to solve. So when you talk about Panalyt, what is it?
So Panalyt's obviously a SaaS technology. It's an engine for integrating HR data from all the various sources that HR uses, and most organizations, really of any size, will use multiple places to store their HR data. Whether it's a core HRIS tool, your payroll system, your recruitment tool, most companies are using multiple tools. And so Panalyt gives an easy place to integrate that data into one place and allows line managers, HR leaders, whoever, to see that data live in a system in pre-built dashboards that we've designed to pull out various business challenges, people challenges, talent challenges that I've experienced over the years. And we also listen to a lot of feedback from our clients about what they're trying to discover about their people, and we custom build dashboards for those as well. So Panalyt's a data integration, data visualization engine, and then the sort of the follow-on stages and products from that baseline is benchmarking, where you pull data together and you can compare data across a location, across a type of employee, a department like technology people in Indonesia. You want to know more about that population. We're able to look at that across all of the different client data sets and sort of see a holistic view where you can benchmark your people, compensation, attrition, etc. against those other organizations. And then as a final stage, moving on to predictive analytics, actually leveraging an AI engine to start to predict behaviors, which is really the super interesting aspect of it, where you start to see the power of large numbers and the ability that gives you to predict behaviors.
Because that's what's missing in traditional HR now, isn't it? They have they're putting these sort of dashboards together, but they can't sort of then action it to the next point. We'll talk a bit about that as well when we look at your presentation. So the interesting thing is the kind of companies you've actually worked for in the past. I mean, it's worth talking about. I mean, you said you had experience in HR, but you've said that you're not blowing your own trumpet here, but you've worked for some pretty senior names here in the industry.
Pretty lucky. Yeah.
Exactly. So you've picked up a lot of skills. Should we just throw them out casually a little bit? Uber, Apple, a few more in there. So you've worked for some of the leading brands in our space, and you've headed up HR in these companies and different departments and so on. What did you learn from that process? Because you would have thought, an Uber or an Apple, they've got it right. They've got all this down pat because they've got the boffins on this. Did you sort of come away from them thinking, actually, these guys are just like everybody else? They have these challenges. What did you learn in that process?
Yeah, that's absolutely that's the question. We look at organizations like Apple and we think, they've got everything sorted. They do everything perfectly internally, and as anyone knows who's worked for those kind of companies, it's very, very definitely not the case. Any company is phenomenal at one or two things. Like Apple is the premier marketing organization, the premier product design organization. But definitely when I worked there, and it was still a fairly early days for the organization. This is I was there when the iPhone was launched. I mean, the first iPhone was launched. So
we're talking about what, 2006?
Yeah.
Right.
So it was still. I mean, when I joined Apple, it was maybe 15,000 people. By the time I left, it was 30,000, and now they're 150,000 plus. Right. So it's a different company now than it was. But yeah, definitely what I learned from working for a company like Apple is the power of getting your facts behind you about making an argument. These are folks that are at the top of their game, and they want all the folks around them to be at the top of their game. So it definitely makes you step up your game and as you're giving strategic advice to senior leaders at Apple, you need to corral your facts. But definitely at that time, there was no such thing as a people analytics function, no such thing as a data reporting function. You were pulling the data together yourself, and that's very long nights putting together data and building those arguments. And then working for other companies, I was head of HR for Noble Group, for example, which is a 16,000 person odd commodities company. And that again was an organization where very large, very good at one particular thing, but had no HR infrastructure. And me and my team, we actually built a technology platform from the ground up. And that actually taught me a lot about the power of data integrations, APIs. I ran a development team there, was in-house developing HR software. And so that got me fairly deep into the tech of it and where the data comes from and the importance of how you connect systems together.
Right.
And then at Uber, so Uber was is the one example here of for all the things that Uber did wrong in many ways around HR, really invested in HR technology very early on and allocated some time of the data science team to the HR organization. So we had a data scientist actually working with us. And that was my learning on really the power of people analytics and what people analytics could really do, the real potential of it. When you do connect all your systems together, when you do have, as Uber had very large amounts of data, and because it's a very young company, very clean data, so very recent data, you could do fantastic analytics. Can I give you an example?
Yeah, please.
So a really sort of very useful piece of analytics that we did there was looking at the connection between who the hiring managers are and who the recruiters are and the outcomes of the people that they hired. And so you looked at the 3-month attrition, like how many people leave in their first 3 months in the company, how many people leave in their first year in the company, how many people become a top performer or a bottom performer. And you look back and look at who the hiring manager was, and it's immediately obvious that there's a top 10% of managers where 90% of the people they hire become a top performer. And there's another group of managers where 90% of the people they hire are gone in 3 months.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? Because before it was guesswork, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
anecdotes.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a sense of what's happening, but you can't really back it up with proof.
Yeah, and I'm fascinated by this, and we've got to go into your pitch deck, but we'll sort of like put the data and the structure behind it. But I'm fascinated behind this because I think now we're kind of understanding that HR has emerged from being, and people analytics, I suppose now, is that what was once, I guess, like a policing function within an organization, making sure we didn't screw up on the contract, et cetera, legal function or a CSR function type thing, is now driving so many aspects of the organization, like culture, marketing, PR. If you've got great people like those top performers, how important that is for marketing or PR, right? You've got those evangelists there who are going out and spreading the word. So then you can go back to the people who found those, that talent and say, we need more of them. We need to support these guys, right? And that is a very powerful marketing tool, right?
Absolutely.
All right, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the pitch deck. Let's talk about what the problem is first, because you've alluded to it here. So let's get that up front. So you've got it here. I mean, the fundamental problem with people data is
that even if you have data, it's in multiple different places and you've got no way of accessing it simply. And even HR has great trouble accessing the data that they own in their systems. The rest of the business has got no chance of getting hold of that data.
Right.
It's sitting in tools that are there to do something, like a recruitment tool is there to help you recruit. It contains a massive amount of useful information, but there's very, very little way to access it. And even the few recruitment tools that do have good reporting built in, they're not combining that piece of data with other data, let's say performance data.
Right.
So you can't see all that data in one place. And that's true, I would say, for almost any company, except that very rare group of the Salesforce, Facebooks, Googles, and Ubers who have invested in people analytics at a very deep level. But almost any other organization has no access to that data.
Right. Is that just because of the way the organization is organized? Because HR and then the performance data, is that an HR thing? I mean, when it comes...
All the data's owned by HR.
Right.
But it all lives in individual systems. And so I think where the problem comes from is partly the nature of the HR technology market, where all these disparate parts of HR sit in different systems, which I think is the best way, because you end up with really dedicated tools that do that thing really well. Yeah. But the HR tech market hasn't been forced to make those tools talk to each other. There's no standard of how data transfers from one HR tool to the other. There's no industry standard, no market standard.
So you're not replacing those tools. You're creating an interface between them.
Absolutely.
All right. Exactly can we dive into that? Because we actually have a look at the platform itself. So you call yourself a SaaS people analytics platform. There's a little bit of and we'll come back to the team in a minute, but let's look at actually how this works. You've got a breakdown here in the a nice sort of infographic here as well, how it actually works, integration. Can you explain what we're looking at here?
Sure. Yeah, so this is illustrating the HR tech stack, if you like, the multiple types of tools that most organizations use. So different buckets here, from the core HRIS to the payroll tools to your performance management tools. I think a lot of people who aren't in HR or haven't worked in larger organizations don't really grasp how many different types of HR tools there are. Right. I mean, that is a little bit inside baseball, but to get across the fact that there are, there's a dozen different varieties of HR tool, and then within that there's multiple different vendors. And so what we put our effort into is building APIs into all of the standard tools, and building in a workflow that allows the easy upload of CSV files or Excel files. And then the particular sort of secret sauce is a proprietary interface about how you map the data from one system into the Panalyt system, and so that all the different systems are feeding the data in, and that data all connects. So you're essentially able to track a single employee's experience and data records through all of those different systems, from when they're a candidate, from when they first start talking to the organization, all the way through to when they leave the organization, and every system that tracks them across the way. And so we have a very nice self-service interface to help map those fields, and that's one of the primary difficulties about why people analytics isn't a stronger function, because of that difficulty of matching that data together.
You've mentioned as well mapping a journey. So one thing I'm curious about is, it's all very well tracking data, but how does that change behavior? How does it actually change behavior within the organization? So, for example, if I was to learn certain aspects of an employee's journey over time, from when they started to their performance to whatever happens later on in the business, does that actually change the way that people deal with it? Does that change the way people do performance reviews? Does it change the way that employees behave? Is there sort of a like a cultural change in that process as a result of mapping it and measuring it?
I suppose, like anything, the act of measuring changes the thing, but so going through like performance management exercises, whether that's once a year or every week, that kind of process focuses people's attention on their performance, makes them think about what they're achieving. So I think processes themselves actually can be beneficial if they're done well. But I think particularly to the Panalyt's usefulness and power here is allowing people to see the results of their decisions, and then influence them to make better decisions going forward. Right. And so an example where it's in a fast-moving organization, you need to make an organization change, and you realize, okay, well, I need to move this manager to that team, I need to move this manager to that team, and I'm just going to make those moves happen to release one of my high talents to go and do some new project. And you just do it, and you think about what's best for the business is to release that great talent to go and run that new project. So you shuffle your managers around and you move on with life. But if you have a data point that shows very clearly, to a very high degree of accuracy, that if an employee has 3 different managers in a year, they're 80% more likely to leave. Right. Across any organization, across any industry, any country, 3 different managers who are responsible for driving your career, owning your career, giving you jobs to do, assessing you. If that person changes 3 times in a year, that person's almost certainly gone. Right. Yeah. And so when you're making that decision around quickly moving these managers around to get to your organizational goal, if you have a very simple, very quick, very easy to access tool that shows you that if you do that, this group of 10 people are almost certainly out the door. if you don't do something extra. So I'm not saying you then don't do the org change that you need to do to drive the business. You still need to drive the business. But then you put some extra attention into those 10 people. You pull them aside, you give them a development plan, you give them some face time with the CEO to let them know that they're really valuable, to let them know that they are important to the organization, and you're not just playing musical chairs with their manager just for the hell of it, right? And I think a lot of very fast-moving organizations are very top-down. They're driven by the charismatic founders. And I've worked for people like Steve Jobs and Travis, right? So I've seen that in action, and they make decisions on the fly, and they're normally great decisions for the business. They're normally pretty terrible decisions for the individuals.
Interesting. Yeah. Because they're doing it from gut instinct.
And they're doing it maybe from a very good analysis of what the business needs at the top level. It might be driven by numbers at that decision. But the impact of it is invisible until suddenly 6 months later they turn around to HR and say, well, why has our attrition gone up?
Exactly.
Why are we losing so many great people?
There's your data points.
Because you don't care about them.
Right.
And I can prove you don't care about them.
Well, that brings me to asking you this question, why? Because we'll dive into the case studies. You've got some great case studies I want to sort of expand a little bit. But the why behind Panalyt. You've spent, your career in HR and people. Why did you decide to do this? Because especially somebody who's worked in large organizations like the Uber, Noble Groups, Apples, for example, you could have built a very successful career and continued building it for these large organizations until you just kind of sailed off into the sunset with your retirement. So why have you chosen to come out, start a startup and do this? What was what was missing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's funny. I think of my time at actually all three of those. Three of the large companies I worked at recently, the Apple, Noble Group, and Uber. They're all organizations going through tremendous growth. They're all going through massive change. And so I don't think of them as working for large companies. I think of them as working for companies that are going through that change, and it's an exciting time to be in organizations like that. And I think that's kind of become a specialization of mine, is to work with organizations going through scale. And I suppose I enjoyed working at Uber, especially the first 6 months or so, where I was head of HR for international. We had maybe 100 people in Asia, maybe 200 people in Europe. And over the course of 18 months, we grew that to about 4,500 people. That's a kind of scale that no organization's ever done, and I would never recommend any organization to do it. But it was an amazing thing to experience. And coming out of that, and obviously, Uber had some tremendous cultural problems, which partly led to me leaving. But definitely it got to the point where, it's becoming a large corporate, and I realized that's not really what I enjoy. What I really enjoy is helping small organizations scale. So after Uber, I spent maybe 2 years doing my own sort of one-man consulting, working for VCs and investors with their portfolio companies. So I spent about 2 years supporting high-growth startups, companies that are getting ready for their Series B, where they're going to have to scale very rapidly, helping them set up their HR departments, restructure their comp plans, sort of relook at who they are from a people perspective and get them set on a different track. So after working with investors for a couple of years doing that and having them repeatedly telling me that I should be doing this as well, and then working with a number of founders, people that I really came to respect. And so there's some great founders out there running some great businesses. Generally I was persuaded to do it. And I'd been thinking about Panalyt or the concept of a self-service people analytics tool. That's always been in the back of my mind, as that's what my industry, my specialization needs. That's actually a tool that I want to use. So I went and built it.
You did it?
Yeah.
You stopped taking advice.
Yeah. Well,
made it happen.
I took the advice and just went and made it happen.
That's the only thing you can do, I think, given your experience as well. And you work with high growth startups or scale. When people are scaling up, and whether that be a corporate who's very much a startup, going from the 200 to 2,000 or whatever, down to the smaller startups. Maybe now they're going through that scale phase. One of the things that you've mentioned is about being able to measure performance within the organization, or be able to track back and find a decision made led to this outcome with this person, right? Surely, without knowing how this works, surely the issue is that in a startup, they don't have a history. They don't have a workforce of 200. Are you then going out and grabbing data sets from other...
Well, that's where the benchmarking comes in. So the benchmarking comes in. There is no publicly available data of the kind of quality that I think we would need. I think the problems with sites or data sources like Glassdoor, the Glassdoor organization,
absolutely.
it's completely self-reported.
Yeah.
There's no way to really know if those numbers are true or if what's reported is true. And so therefore it's very easy for a manager who doesn't agree with your advice to just dismiss it and say, well, okay, that's self-reported data. I don't need to listen to that.
Yeah.
Whereas what we're building within Panalyt is a data universe of similar-sized companies in the region or in the regions where our clients are. So we cover the location, we cover the type of industry, the type of employees, that are what the jobs are that they're doing. And so, then we build up even a short history across a very large number of companies and a very large number of employees gives us the predictive data to be able to basically say what is normal, what is usual within your industry. So I worked at one organization that had attrition of 50%. They'd lose 50% of their people every year.
Well, I'm assuming that's high.
It is high. And then a manager see that top line number and they want to make a knee-jerk decision. But when you've got a larger data set and you can dig in and see, well, actually the developer team have got a very normal attrition, normal compared to the rest of the market. Whereas let's say your sales team have got a very high attrition compared to the other salespeople in the market.
Right,
then you're doing a much more nuanced dive into the data, and then you can target decision making much more effectively. So for an organization of 10 people who wants to become 50 people, how useful is that? I think having the compensation data that's driven from other live current startups helps a founder to make a decision around, am I going to pay market? Am I going to pay over the odds because I need to hire quickly and I need to hire certain talent? Am I going to pay under the odds because I think we're great at developing people and I don't need to pay over the odds? At the moment, they're making that decision in a vacuum, or they're using very inaccurate data that's available publicly, that's, again, publicly reported data. So we're giving them much more nuanced data where they can really look and see, okay, a 2-year experienced data scientist in Singapore, this is what the rest of the market's paying. Therefore, I can make that decision. So compensation is an easy one to talk about.
Yeah, sure.
There's a lot.
There's a lot more. There's a longitudinal journey as well. Are you employing this on yourself as well and your organisation?
Yeah, of course.
I know it's an of course, but
you got to eat your own dog food.
Practice exactly. But just curious, like your insights, because what I want to ask you is, have you sort of like challenged your own assumptions by looking at the data? Because even though you consider yourself an analytics person, you're going to make human decisions. Like actually, I know this, and I do this all the time. And I look back on something. No, I was wrong because the data told me I was wrong. Even though 20 years down the line, I should know better.
Yeah, I mean, funnily, I don't think of myself as an analytics person.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely think of myself as, HR manager, entrepreneur, BD guy, and I just happen to really trust the analytics, and I know that you need to have that to back up your decisions. But I think that's why I'm still also very careful I try to sort of always give the founders, business leaders, the benefit of the doubt that they are making the right decision for their business, but it's just that they're not understanding the impact that's going to have on their people. And then if I give them better data, they understand the impact of those probably correct business decisions, then they can then account for them, do the follow-up to mitigate the negative impact on their people. So I suppose I'm not saying that you have to make all your decisions based on the people numbers. Right. But yeah, I mean, in terms of challenging my own assumptions, I suppose because I've had such a journey of using the data, I tend to look at the data and then what is this telling me? And then I'll go ahead and make a decision. Okay, I've kind of trained myself in that way.
Let me make it easier for you, Daniel. I mean, in an organization of our size, let's 7, without knowing anything about me and my business and how I run it and how we as a team run it, just assume I'm the average startup entrepreneur with all my foibles and, weird idiosyncrasies of being a founder, I want to be Steve Jobs, etc. Right? So just assume that I'm like that organization of 7 people. If I was to use a platform like this, where are the sort of like the quick wins? What do you think would happen?
Compensation is definitely the quick win. I mean, for an organization that's very small, very young, the easy use of Panalyt for startups is to look at that compensation number and to be able to get to a very granular level of detail around, I need to hire a data scientist. And the reason I choose that role, because that's the great example of a role where the salary is changing incredibly quickly in the market. It's a very small talent pool. You need to make the right decision. And so absolutely for early stage startups, I would say the reason that you'll go to Panalyt initially is to start looking at, am I paying people right? For where we are, for where we are as a stage of the company, where we are location-wise, and what that person's roles and skills are. But what I'd hope is that over time, as you sort of run the business through for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, you're going to be the data is going to be plugging in. We'll build an API to your payroll provider or wherever we get the data from. And then in 2 or 3 years, you'll look back and you'll have that history. And maybe at that time you're 50 people, but you'll have a track record of what your decisions as a leader. You make, let's say, performance decisions about your staff. What impact those performance decisions had on people's likelihood of staying, or you gave people salary increases, and did that make people perform higher or not? Actually, most data shows that bonuses don't result in higher attrition, in higher retention, and salary increases don't lead to higher performance. So what does? Generally, it's engagement. Generally, it's how much time you spend with your people.
But can you quantify that? Can I, do I have to tap in like how many hours I spent with my team this month? Or?
If you, it would be great at some point. I would advise any founder to run an engagement survey on a really regular basis, not because when you're 5 people, not because you don't know how those 5 people are feeling. It gives you a baseline so that when you're 50 people, you know what good looks like, or you know what you have a sense of what 5 people are feeling, and you'll lose that sense when it's 50 people. But when you can look back and say, well, at 5 people, our engagement scores looked like this. People responded to these 10 questions in this way across the team. And as it grew, some things we've gotten better at and some things we've gotten worse at. Those scores have improved or declined over time. And the important thing about engagement scores is the score itself means nothing. It's the change in time that means something. And then again, when you as a founder, you have the organizational history, you'll look back and you'll see when engagement really dipped, and you'll probably see attrition increased. You probably lost 3 or 4 critical people sort of 3 months later. And you can start to go, okay. And that dip in engagement, again, because you know the business, you can link that back to, that's when I was doing a fundraising round. So I was focused on the investors and I wasn't focused on my team. And you can start to see the connections. And then the next time you do a fundraising round, it'll help to change your behavior. So it's not a quick win. Again, the compensation maybe is a quick win, but analytics is an overtime tool.
And it takes the BS out of making decisions as well, which is ultimately...
It helps to remove bias.
Yeah, I say BS, you say bias. All right, let's have a look at
to keep it clean.
Let's have a look at your case study. You've got a great case study in here. I know there's a whole bunch in your pitch deck, but there's one that I wanted to pick from, if I can just jump forward towards the end of the pitch deck. There's one from Kareem. So this is the Middle East ride-sharing platform.
Yeah, they are the Uber of the Middle East. I mean, they're just like Grab here or Didi in China. They're much larger in their home location than Uber. But unlike those other places, Uber still actually operates there and is competing heavily with Kareem.
So this is an interesting study, isn't it? Because you've got, it's not like a traditional office-based corporation, isn't it? Where everybody's you've got lots of drivers who are sort of working for the company or not. So,
so importantly, the drivers, just like Uber, are definitely not employees.
Right.
100%.
So
they're not employees. Absolutely, they're not inside.
But they're a key part of the
day.
Business, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But
you're
they
dealing
are
with the
partners rather than employees.
Got it.
And so this is absolutely focused on the employees, and
and
I'm sure Kareem would want me to really heavily emphasize that they're not employees
for tax reasons,
for all kinds of reasons.
So let's talk about. So
but this is about employees. But actually, I think. Some part of your point actually really is still correct, because Kareem, just like Uber, the nature of the business means that you don't have all of your staff sitting in one big office, all working together. You have these very small remote teams working in the individual cities. And we had exactly the same issue at Uber, where you hire these incredibly smart, very, very bright, highly educated, highly motivated teams, and you put them into a completely remote city in the middle of nowhere, and they might have 2 colleagues next to them, and and then tell them to go and conquer the world, or conquer that city anyway. So you do have these highly distributed teams, which is actually where part of the case study here, which is the organization network analysis, comes from. So should I do you want me to dig into that?
You could dive in, indulge.
So organization network analysis is looking at the metadata behind email and chat systems. So the metadata, not the content of the email or the chat, but who's sending to whom and when. And so we can count how often, so let's say Slack, the Slack tool, right? So let's say your whole organization's on Slack. We'll measure how often people Slack each other and who's Slacking whom. And so when you know what department people are in, and you know sort of where they sit in the organization organizationally, but also their tenure, age, gender, you can start to map behaviors. And at a very simple level, you can see the connections between people. And very often you find within a country, people are communicating very well within the country, but typically there's one person that's very well connected to the rest of the organization and contacts people in other countries and other cities and head office a lot. And there's other people that never talk to anyone outside the country. In some departments, you'll find the most successful salespeople, because we did do this analysis at a previous firm, you'll find the most successful salesperson is very well connected to people in marketing and operations. And we're not looking at the content. So there's an assumption here, and I think it's correct, that it doesn't matter if they're exchanging cat photos every day with someone in operations.
They're exchanging.
They're exchanging. They're connecting. And then that one time when they need operations to do something a little bit unorthodox to help a sale happen, they'll get that to happen because they've got that relationship. Whereas another salesperson that doesn't have those relationships, they can't pull any strings. They can't work outside the box. And so the most successful salespeople are very well networked within their own companies. And so the network analysis that we're doing with Kareem shows how some countries, some city teams are very well connected to each other and to other city teams, and those, in theory, and we're still looking at the data to support this, but in theory will be the higher performing cities. That's our assumption. That's what the anecdotes say. And so we're going to see if the data backs that up. Whereas cities where generally they're slower to succeed, they're slower to apply new strategies, slower to apply the lessons learned of the organization, the assumption, the anecdote would say that they are less networked within the organization.
Interesting. So going back to your point about like super connectors within an organization, are they not necessarily the one with super connector in their title or whatever that may be officially?
No, that's a very good point, because part of the visualization that we're working on is a side-by-side visualization of your network analysis, sort of where you sit and how the connections you've got go within the organization, next to your position on the actual org chart. Because we realize that actually that sometimes is related, but very often isn't. And very often line managers will overlook the actual networked power of someone that's fairly junior in their organization. And by allowing a manager to understand that, should allow them to sort of release some of the potential and leverage the potential within their team better.
Right. So they can identify those who are being overlooked because they're junior. They may even be an intern, for example, but a super communicator.
But super networked in a certain organization, especially if you need to get a certain kind of thing done. So, so let's say we need to pull together a social media team. Well, then we need to target sort of 20-somethings who are sort of spread across the organization and can represent different parts of the organization. Well, who's going to be best to do that? Well, we could look at the network analysis and work out who's actually super connected in that age group across departments, and we could do that in a very quick way.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's insightful as well, because the people who are doing this already without being told to do it, often they're, that's the character trait that you're looking for.
Natural,
exactly. Great. Well, there's a whole bunch of other case studies in the pitch deck as well, which people can check out. Let's talk about your team as well. So if we can jump back in on the pitch deck, obviously this is a key part of the story here. I want to understand a bit about, before we have a look at your investors and advisors as well, how you guys met. What's the story here?
So I mentioned I was doing a bunch of consulting projects after working at Uber, and on one of those projects was a crazy well-funded high-growth startup called Noon e-commerce in Dubai, which would be a whole other podcast talking about that as a history story about how not to run a startup. But yeah, so I was brought in to again set up the HR organization, particularly the HR technology and systems and processes and that sort of thing. I had there was a guy on LinkedIn who had been chasing me for a little while for an internship at Uber where I had been, and I realized that I had just a shed load of data to crunch and to pull together to create a clean data set for this new startup, and so I pinged him on LinkedIn, and that's Yusuf Raza, and Yusuf had was just graduating, had done a couple of other people analytics internships, I think with Rolls-Royce and Credit Suisse, had just that right background. You know, he'd done sort of what we were trying to do within the organization, and so he came to work with me in Dubai, and apparently he got fairly famous within his university as being the guy who got the full paid internship out in Dubai.
Good for him.
And he was around again when I was making this decision around should I be productizing this idea and founding a startup, and so Yusuf put us together with Pratyam and Sharik on the deck there. Pratyam, Sharik, and Yusuf are all grads of NTU, and they all have this background in the hackathon networks. So hackathons where the engineering students will spend 2 days crunching on a particular problem to turn it from pure idea into a functioning MVP, and then they get judged and win cool prizes. And Pratyam particularly, but also Yusuf and Sharik are deep in the hackathon weeds. And so by sitting down with these guys, we did a couple of offsites that. I flew the whole team to Thailand, and we sat in a villa for 3 days, and we built the MVP. We did that over 2 different sessions.
Was that before you hired them, or that was after you hired them?
This is
as a part of the hiring process.
As part of hey guys, let's go and build something. And what you were saying before about people are really engaged by a project that they feel they can really contribute to, that's interesting. So of course, when I started describing people analytics to these young engineering students, they had no idea what I was talking about. But when I was talking about very large numbers that we are going to crunch and we're going to put into really beautiful dashboards, and there's a technical challenge at every step of the way that no one's ever quite solved. They grabbed that idea and just ran with it. And the culture of the hackathon, the culture where there's no such thing as a bad idea and there's no such thing as something that can't be built. Everything can be built. It's just what are the different hacks we're going to use to get there. And Pratyam's an absolute genius at this. He can take 2 bits of wood and rub it together and produce a functioning website. So that's kind of how we started, and that's also why we sponsored the most recent NTU hackathon recently. We kind of wanted to give back to that community, and Pratyam was invited back as a engineering advisor to the hackathon teams, and Yusuf was a judge, and we're very happy to sponsor the NTU.
Yeah, there's a great lesson in there as well for people who want to work for startups, is how not through the traditional routes, but how to get recognized, how to get on board. Yeah. And for them, it's a good way of working out whether or not you can work together as well. The chemistry is there because you're a team working together in
very intense circumstances.
Exactly.
No, we worked out very, very quickly through those sort of 4 days building the MVP that we were just a team that could call each other out, that could argue, that could debate, and then just get on and crunch and build stuff. It absolutely built the sort of the formative culture of the company, and we still sort of operate like that. We're completely open about what's a good idea, what's a bad idea, what we want to build, how we're going to build it, and get on with it.
Great. Yeah. Well, we'll come back to that in a minute because we'll talk about the culture and recruitment as well. Your raise. So tell us a little bit about where you are in your history in terms of, for example, how old are you first as a company? How long have you been going?
A year.
So you've been going a year.
Almost exactly a year.
Up to this point, you've have angel investors on board?
Angel and VC. So Wavemaker led our sort of first pre-seed round, where we had about a 2.5 mil val, and we raised about $500,000 on that. So we're just going now into a second round. The nature of the product does mean that we have a fairly long sales cycle. B2B SaaS for larger organizations is a fairly long sales cycle. So we're looking for another 6-month runway to really prove out our sales cycle. We have revenues now, but we want to get to a healthier revenue position before we go to a full seed or A round. So we're looking for about 300 to 500K to give us that extra runway.
Okay. Is there a particular type of investor partner that you're looking for? Because there's a lot of money out there at the moment, so you've got to be a bit sort of careful about who exactly you want. Do you want just the money, or you want the dumb money, or you want something else to come with it?
It's a great question. I think, again, I've been very lucky because of the several years I've spent at companies like Uber and then consulting for VCs. So I've been very lucky to have exposure and to know who I think are the good folks and people that have actually worked with me. And I think that makes a massive difference. So the guys at Ardent Capital, Piers Bennett, Paul Srivacal, I've actually done hands-on work for them. So that was a fairly easy discussion about their investment, and the relationship with Wavemaker is also very strong. And Paul Santos at Wavemaker is a fantastic guy to sort of leave you alone when you need to just get on with stuff, but to be there to really ask you the tough questions and to come up with to really help you plan out your sales and marketing strategy. He's great at building that sales story about how you're taking your product to market. And so Paul's been a great supporter. But also one of our investors talking about sort of what's the ideal investor, aside from Wavemaker. It is one of our investors is Black Mountain, which is an HR services company, and they're very high touch. They've got a large number of clients where they manage HR data for their clients. So they really understand the power of the system we're building, and they have a direct connection to a whole client group. And so obviously an ideal investor would be someone who is in some way in the market, in our similar market space, where there's some synergy with what they're building and what we're building. That's a great place to be.
Good. Let's finish up by talking about Spartan.
Oh, yeah.
So, and obviously you're recruiting, as any startup founder.
Sure, yeah.
Full-time recruiting. It seems to be endless, trying to find talent. That's what it's all about these days. Maybe we can talk about it in the context of this. So is this the recruitment process? I mean, if you're listening, by the way, on the podcast, not watching the video, there's pictures of people being put through military-style obstacle courses.
Yeah,
but they're smiling.
The Spartan race is a fantastic event. I mean, it's a global event. The Spartan race series, but they're in Singapore every 6 months or so, down on Sentosa Beach, and they lay out this really rigorous sort of military style assault course.
Yeah.
And there's 3 levels of it, but the basic level of the sprint is a 5K run, and I think 20 or 30 obstacles for you to climb over and run through, and muddy fields and barbed wire you need to crawl under and walls you need to climb, and so a bunch of the team are pretty strong fitness fanatics, particularly AK, who's our data scientist, is a super athletic guy, and you can see him on the monkey rings there, but him and Yusuf and Pratim and our designer Iwani, they all went and participated in the Spartan. They all did really well as well. They all got.
They didn't convince you to go, or they tried to.
I was chief photographer. Yeah. So actually, it was pouring with rain. So I just stood there trying to hide my camera from the rain while I was capturing them and cheering them on.
That was your sweet spot.
Yeah, absolutely. But we got some great shirts designed, and
very good.
Iwani did a
Good
great job on
well.
the shirts. And it was just fantastic team building. Getting training up for it and the day itself, and then celebrating afterwards. It's been doing that sort of team building is really important, even for a small organization.
What are you looking for in sort of moving forward? Because people will watch this and think, right, I want to be part of this. I love hearing your story, Daniel, and I think you're doing something which I feel I can add to. But there's more than that, isn't it? More than somebody just saying, look, I'm a data scientist. You're looking for a particular type of person, or with certain hard skills or certain soft skills. What is it that really for you checks the box that they're going to fit in with your organization?
In terms of the hard skills, I mean, obviously in the development roles. And for example, one of the roles we're looking for is an API engineer. Building APIs into all of these various systems is an incredibly complex task. And from everything we've learned so far, the APIs out of most HR systems is some of the worst tech that's out there in the market. They are terrible, and we need to build a really scalable solution to build APIs very quickly from these disparate tools. So there are obviously technical skills particular technical skills we want to bring on board. But in terms of soft skills, I've been around for quite a while. I've run very large teams, and my management style is I'm not a particularly hands-on manager. I like to hire people that are passionate about what they do, are good at what they do, and we should agree on what the objective is, and I just want people to run for it. And I don't want to be holding hands and chivying people and kicking people up the butt. That's not my style, and that's not what I'm there for.
Right.
I'm there to be part of the team and do my part of the job, and people should do their part of the job, and we should all just aim for the same goal.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking for people that are self-starters, that believe in what they're trying to do and are able to sort of plan out their work and plan out and be very self-driven and sort of decide their own time. We're very flexible on sort of time schedules, and when you need to take time off, you take time off, and when you need to work through the night, you work through the night. And so we're not strict about that sort of thing. So having people that are very self-driven is important.
Excellent. Daniel West, everybody, founder of Panalyt. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
What's the best way for people to reach out to you? Do you have a preferred channel?
Email's easy, djw@panalyt.com, or you can just go to the website, panalyt.com, and there's a contact there. Email's probably easy. Or LinkedIn, obviously. You can find me on LinkedIn very easily.
We'll put all the details in the show notes.
Yeah,
Daniel,
please.
thank you so much.
Grand, thank you very much. It's been great.